show.
I'm Hardeep. I'm the editor of Byline Times.
I will be joined by some remarkable guests.
I'm Hardeep Matharu, and I'm on a journey through Americana with
me, Bonnie Greer.
Over this series, we will be traveling through American icons and each week picking a souvenir to take home with us. Why have you selected The Godfather? Why is it such an icon that we need to look at?
Well, first of all, I can remember the first time I saw it, so that's always an indication to me that something had happened. Anytime Italian-American mobsters, in quotes, were portrayed on screen, Italians didn't play them. The closest one to The Godfather was Kirk Douglas playing a movie like a couple of years before. Never an Italian. So that was the first kind of revolution of this. And I think it came out of the civil rights movement because, and for my generation, who were working to identify ourselves, under Black Power and all of that. And along comes an Italian-American director who's showing you Italian Americans.
And not just as mobsters, right?
Exactly.
There's so much more than that.
The movie is about the gun, the movie is about the gangsters, the movie is about the violence, but also the movie is about the cannoli, the family, the food, the fellowship, the fathers and sons, the American dream. So to me, that just says everything about The Godfather.
He opens it brilliantly and tells you what every immigrant, particularly white immigrant, feels when they come here. I believe in America. It's brilliant. It's about a guy who comes to The Godfather to ask for a hit on another person. All of this happens within the first couple of minutes of this film. Now we're kind of used to that, but then people's jaws fell down. It was so much emotion and brilliance in this one, and then Brando's playing with a cat at the same time. It's just enormous opening.
I watched The Godfather probably for the first time only a few years ago. Couldn't get my head around so much of what was going on in terms of the mafia and the deals and the families. And then I watched it a second time, and I watched it a third time, and then I watched the second part as well. And I just viscerally feel that of all the explorations on screen about the complexities of immigration, of identity, of unbelonging, which is a big topic for us, nothing quite stirs me in the same way as The Godfather, because for all of its sort of horror, it is such a human story, and it's a story of people destroying themselves and where they don't fit. I mean, there's so many things we can go into.
The brilliance of Coppola, and I agree with you. I mean, the brilliance of Coppola was that he was able to make everybody identify, even like me, a Black girl from the South Side of Chicago, to identify with this Italian American family.
The Godfather effect, how the film changed the way Italian Americans were depicted in the media, moving away from stereotypes to more fully realized portrayals. It helped Italianize American culture with phrases like, "I'll make him an offer he can't refuse," entering the lexicon.
See, that's the most important thing to realize. And this had never happened in American cinema before, where you sat there and you had to remember, these are murderers. This guy, Don Corleone, the only thing he was a pimp. And he said that. He did everything else. He didn't run drugs, but he controlled the whole of his area. He was a mobster. He was a bad guy. When I was growing up, Robert F. Kennedy was doing the hearings against the mafia when I was a kid. So the mafia came on. Everybody was Italian. Everybody's what they used to call a mook or made man, all of that. So you sat there and you watched these guys on TV, and then suddenly The Godfather and this guy's brilliance made you sit there. Nobody's done that since, to be pretty frank about it. Made you sit and look at a bunch of bad people and really see within that the whole immigrant story of the United States. It is the contradiction of the United States. It is its foundational contradiction.
It's really interesting because a lot of the literature now and the sociological sort of analysis of immigration in America, there's this perception, I think, that the Irish and the Italian Americans, as opposed to, African Americans, they could become white American, because of how they looked. But this film is really interesting in that Michael Corleone, and through his father, Don Corleone, we're always seeing this struggle. Michael appears in the first film for his sister's wedding with his white American girlfriend. He's been in the army, and he turns up and this beautiful Italian-American wedding's going on. And he says to Kay, his girlfriend, "This is my family, it's not me." I mean, he gives her an outline of some of the deals that his dad has struck over the years, some of the methods that are used. And he says it in this sort of flat tone of voice. "That's my family, Kay, it's not me. It's not me." And yet this same man is the next Godfather. And it's that journey. So he's not, I'm not Italian-American. I'm becoming American. But in order to become more American, he's destroying something about his Italian-Americanness, which is the thing that calls, in my view, into his soul, all the scenes in Italy. And can you unpick some of that journey?
This is brilliant what you're saying, because I saw that movie when it first came out. I've seen that movie many, many, many times. I've never thought of Kay like that, because I'm a black person in America. I didn't see Kay those were two white people on the screen as far as I was concerned at the beginning. And then as you pointing out, you're absolutely right. And there's also the brilliance of the moment that Michael finds out that his father was hit. They're coming out of the bells of St. Mary's, starring Ingrid Bergman, the ultimate white woman at that time. All of these signals, the way she's dressed, the way she looks, she's going, "Oh, Michael, look." And he sees the paper. He grabs the paper. She wouldn't have grabbed the paper. She would have bought the paper. He grabs the paper. So all of that, I didn't even, I knew it unconsciously until you just brought it up. But to me, this is the journey with a guy who finds out that he is part of his family, and his family are not white people. But I was sitting there, at the beginning of this, when this movie first came out, a student just about to go to university, Black Power was there, Martin Luther King, and I just saw these two, one from the good side, one from the bad side, betraying to be from the good side. But you're right. And you see, that is what, when his father's finally hit, then Michael says to his father in the hospital, "I'm with you."
It's so interesting to hear that, Bonnie, that for you there were two white people on that screen in that scene, Kay and Michael.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really interesting because by the second or third time I watched it, I really identified with this story, not because I have any of it in my background in terms of the mafia or that sort of thing, but I'm from an Indian family. And I am, as we've touched on in the first of our journeys, white passing, I guess you would say, because I look very white and I'm completely Indian, I'm very British, and people tend to think I'm not Indian, or I could pass as being not Indian.
What you look like, and if I were to see you for the first time, you look like one of those paintings, pre-Raphaelite.
Yes,
with the hair, the coloring. You look perfectly pre-Raphaelite. So if you said this to me, it would make me think, oh, I don't know as much as I thought I did about your culture.
Which is why when I look at Michael, I think that's really interesting in terms of how we observe him and Kay. Because for me, he's not a white man. He is somebody like me who is from this culture, but can pass as not being as part of it. But there's always this drawing back. It's really interesting when people have asked me before to explain the pull of family in Indian cultural life. And I've got to the point where I say, I can't really explain it. You have to feel it. Like people ask me, so what is it with, kids growing up and then keep coming back to seeing their parents or their families? And I say, it's the theme music of The Godfather. That's what it is. There's something, it goes really deep. And that's what I saw from the beginning in Michael, this really conflicted man. But as you say, then his father, The Godfather, there's a hit. And he comes straight back. And then I feel that his journey is the one that it was always going to be in some way. He was always going to take over. But it's really interesting how he got there because it didn't seem apparent.
See, you're making me think of something else. We have to remember in The Godfather that Michael was a vet, World War II. My dad was a vet in World War II. Now, the difference, and this is what Coppola points out brilliantly, the difference is that my father came home and had to fight segregation to get a home, everything. Michael Corleone comes home, and he's got this big family. He's got all of this with him. And yet at the same time, he's had an experience that they refuse to have. His brother calls him basically a sucker for fighting for the United States. It's about your family. So he actually is moved out in an attempt to be white. And he doesn't even realize that that's what he's doing. He goes all the way through, and then his dad gets hit. He comes into the hospital. He arranges this guy who's at the beginning of the movie to act like a button man. So when the mob comes by, they'll see him with his hand. They know, oh, that's a button guy at the door. We're not going in there. Michael knew how to do that. And then he goes in there. He goes and he tells his father, I'm with you. And then he totally becomes the thing that he's trying not to be. It is a revolutionary movie for Americans. I mean, we're sitting there into this story because it's so brilliantly made, but the layers that Coppola lays down, partly because it's got to be about his own life.
The Godfather was not directly autobiographical. Coppola's Italian-American background, early career struggle, family responsibilities, and financial pressures all shaped his personal investment in the film and his creative choices as director. The Godfather's themes of family, power, and the American dream resonated with Coppola's own life experiences.
Because he worked with Corman. I mean, he's a big screenwriter. But at the same time, he was writing, all these movies that had nothing to do with who he really was. And he got a chance with Columbia to make this movie, and he makes a revolution. Nobody has topped this movie in terms of what it does and what it reveals about the American psyche. He hit a moment. It still resonates, partly because it's just a great story. It's so brilliantly told. And part two is even more of a masterpiece. But this one shreds a myth that in America at that time, there were only, because of the civil rights movement, because of everything, there were only black people and white people. And Coppola said, it's not that simple.
Godfather was the Italian Star Wars.
It's sort of like a Western in some way.
It became the touchstone for films about organized crime.
My boyfriend at the time used to take me to these movies, and he was a black man who, very much from the hood. I met him at university and all of this. Every time somebody got killed in any of those movies, he loved it. He identified with Dirty Harry, who didn't like black people. That was the subtext. He identified with Michael Corleone. The business understood that black men were doing that, so they created Shaft and saved MGM as a consequence. They created Shaft so we could have our own Michael Corleone and Dirty Harry. All of that arc of sort of the glorification of black manhood opposed to the Martin Luther King story version of it. This was the H-Rap, Brown, Stokely Carmichael guy as a private detective. And so they could actually roll with Michael Corleone because they just put themselves in there. Dirty Harry, Dirty Harry was the guy. He was, the N-word. That's what he was for a lot of people. I'm sitting with a brother who's like going, yeah, I'm saying, but Dirty Harry would have killed you. Yeah, you have to listen to that. And that need for manhood, that denial of manhood that not only African Americans didn't have, indigenous Americans didn't have, Chinese Americans didn't have, Japanese Americans didn't have, and Italian Americans didn't have until they disappeared like the Irish did. And then along comes Coppola, who says, no, you tried to vanish, but you can't. And not only that, I don't want you to. Look at who you are.
So I loved the first film once I understood it after a few watches. And then the second, is in a way something else for me because it goes back and tells us a story of Vito Corleone, the Godfather, Michael's dad. And I think it's really, really interesting how those journeys are parallel, but very different. Do you want to unpick a bit of that, Bonnie, about the world Vito Corleone grows up in Sicily, his journey to America, seeing the Statue of Liberty, and then his early years in Little Italy in New York?
Well, I think when they gave him the green light to do whatever he wanted to do, Coppola decided, right, I'm going to tell this migration story. So he decides to tell the story of how his people came to America, what made them who they are.
The really interesting thing about this is Vito Corleone has to come to America because of the violence of tribalism in Sicily. That's what he's fleeing. He's lucky to get out of there. His father has been killed. His brother has been killed. His mother is killed trying to defend him from a mafia lord. And he's smuggled out and gets on a boat and ends up in America. And for me, that's always been really interesting because of that tribalism. Again, that notion of identity, insiders, outsiders. And then when we see him as a young man, by now married, he's in Little Italy. So he's surrounded by other Italians who have also fled. But it seems to me that, as you say, they're not fully integrated in American society. They can't be because they're outsiders, but they have this insiders community of all Italian Americans. And it's really interesting, like in parallel, what is Michael trying to escape from and drawn towards? And the same with his father. What was he escaping from and what is he drawn towards as his journey continues?
Vito Corleone is escaping literally, Sicily, because he's next to get blown away. So he's getting the hell out of there and the village sends him out. So he goes. That's what the village does, is like, save this guy. And Michael is escaping the myth, and if you like the word racism, directed toward Italians, because Italians in those days were assumed to be the guys at the restaurant. They were always mobsters. They were always in the mob. If you had an Italian name, that's what you were. If you were an Italian woman, you were easy, or you were some kind of rosary-infested creature, whatever. It was never, you weren't literally a human being unless you changed your name and you became white. That's how you could do it. And Coppola is saying, no, this is where we came from, and we have to do that too, to a certain extent. So ethnic minority men sitting in the audience, and one of the reasons that movie was a hit, because Latino men, black men could sit there and go, I get this, I know what you're saying. Okay, you walk up and say your name is Corleone, and they look up, maybe an Irish guy will look up, or someone with an English name is going like, yeah, right, okay, and make a joke about you, a pizza joke or whatever, and get away with it. But then what the Italian Americans did was disappear. Of course, not all of them. Coppola wants us to understand that they could disappear. There is that wonderful moment, I think it's in part one, where they're around the table and they're talking about the drug distribution, and one of the mafia people says, leave it with the dark people. They don't have souls. I mean, that was like stunning. That's a stunning line. It was an absolutely revolutionary line because no one has said anything like that blatantly in American cinema before. But that's what it was thought.
I mean, unlike Michael, Vito Corleone doesn't seem to be trying to get away from his roots. I mean, he's very aware of the racism that exists in American society towards him and his family. But there's never a sense for me that he is ashamed of being Italian-American, that he's trying to get away from those roots. A really poignant moment comes towards the end of the first film, where he knows that Michael is now his successor. And he says to him, I thought Senator Corleone or Governor Corleone, I thought you would be American. I thought you would be the person who was in charge in a legitimate way. And I think it's a really interesting arc for Michael as well. By the end of the film, and I hope people have watched it, and if they haven't, please watch it before listening further. But he destroys his family and he destroys himself doing it in this tussle between I'm American, this is my family, Kay, it's not me. Then he becomes the Godfather. He becomes Italian-American in terms of the mafia, but he's more ruthless. And by the end, he's just a man sitting on his own. Has he resolved that conflict? Can it ever be resolved?
You know, that's beautiful. You know, remember when after he got shot, he's in the bed and he's saying, "Where's Michael? Where's Michael?" And they don't hear him. And they lean down to listen to him. He can barely say it, "Where's Michael?" And then they tell him, and you can see Brando's eyes like, "I'm dead, it's over." And then in the vineyard with his grandson, before that, Michael tells him he's really smart. He can read the funny papers. He's smarter than me. Then, of course, he's in the little backyard, and Don Corleone dies at the feet of his grandson, who thinks it's a joke. Then the little boy realizes, uh-oh, this is a problem. And he says, uh-oh, and he runs off, and this guy is lying there. And then the next scene where Michael is sitting there because he's crossed over. He's sitting there and all these people are coming to pay allegiance to him. That he has chosen to avenge his father is where he crosses over to not being an American. He's lost what his father really wanted him to be. His father would not have wanted him to go out and do what he did, and he did. He avenges his father.
So is he nowhere by the end?
At the end, he is nowhere. And it's interesting because, again, like I saw when they first came out, with the cinema full of men, and when he closes that door on Kay, every guy in that theater stood up and said, "Yeah!" They loved it. And I thought, whoa, it is that arc of American masculinity, the conqueror, the one who can control it all. Like that's partly what Trump's presidency and his whole thing is based on, is this American masculinity, this notion of I'm in control, I'm in charge. Women, minorities, kids, you stay out in the kitchen where you belong, the guys are running it. It's masterful, it's amazing. And it's a good choice for us to be talking because there has been no movie that has explained America as well as that in an entertaining, high art way. It's 1972, and it would have been that moment because we're in Watergate. And there is this incredible sort of idea, we're all thinking, is this the end? Is this the end of the Republic? Is this it? And who are we? Who are we? And we're still asking that question.
So Bonnie, we've met the Corleone family, different generations, different conflicts. It's meant a lot to me to hear what you have to say on this bit of our journey, because as I said, for me, The Godfather and the complexity it explores around immigration and identity, unbelonging, and the internal conflicts. You know, that's why that film, I think, means so much to a lot of people, because on the face of it, it's about external conflict. It's about mafia guys killing each other, and that's obvious. It's the internal conflicts. It's everything that happens within these people and transforms them in ways that they can't even imagine at the beginning of the movies, which I so love, and I think makes it such a good pick for us to have explored in our travels. So what do you think is the souvenir for us to take away this time?
Well, I would say that iconic lying piece of statuary called the Statue of Liberty, which was created by the French, which I think is a joke, and that stands in New York Harbor, and which people were traditionally taken past as they came in, immigrants. And we see in Godfather Part 2, in that wonderful scene where they're looking at it. The second souvenir, because I'm thinking, actually, Godfather Part 1 is more written. It's a written movie. 2 is more visual, is the statue of the Virgin Mary that's being taken through the parade with all the money stuck on top of her, all of this. That's Sicilian peasant. And not only that, nobody would have dared touch that statue. She was loaded with just prayers and cash, and she's taken through the streets. The priest is leading, and then, of course, we know above it, a murder's happening. So it's an amazing piece to remember that duality of immigrants coming to the United States, but somehow holding on to that part of it. That was them.
Thank you for joining us on this leg of our journey. We will be continuing next time. A journey through Americana with me, Hardeep Matharu.
And me, Bonnie Greer. For extra content, join me and Hardeep in the diner.
Hello and welcome to the show.
I'm Hardeep Matharu. I'm the editor of Byline Times.
I will be joined by some remarkable guests.